Good afternoon, everybody, and a warm welcome to our Environmental Destination Insights webinar for June 2026. It's great to see many of you here and joining us this afternoon, and we've got lots of exciting things to update you on and bring the latest information to you based on a lot of the engagement that we've had to date. So yeah, without further ado, I'm just going to carry on. So your video, sadly, we can't see you today and we can't hear you, but you can definitely get in touch with us. Please do that by using the Teams chat function for kind of general issues, or if you've had kind of things, and then the Q&A function is enabled for this webinar, so please use that for your questions. We are recording this session, and the slides and the recording will be shared after the meeting and made available. So if you know people that haven't been able to make today, or if you wanted to watch any of the sections back, we'll make that available to you after this morning. For those of you that collect BASIS and NEROSO points, a point has been allocated for each of those schemes, but please pop your membership number for those in the chat and I'll make sure that you're registered to receive those points. So our agenda today. What we really wanted to use today is to provide an update on all the work that's happening under environmental destination alongside our wider regional water resources planning and the integrated management that goes on across the area. So we've got a few different sections as part of that. One is to reflect on the workshops that we held with many of you over the winter, and then how we're using that alongside our technical investigations and building on the environmental destination guidance that we've now got from the Environment Agency that was released in the spring to take us to that next stage forward to do the actions that we've been asked of as a regional group to understand environmental destination, to get it to the best information that it can using the local evidence, and then to start to plan to what that future looks like. So Jo, Becky and I will provide an update on where we are up until then. And then really delighted that Katerina and the team have been working really hard in the background to how we bring all of this information together, to show it to you, to play it back to you, to have all the information in a very transparent basis that you can then really start feeding in and building in as we go forward into future iterations. So Katerina is going to show that dashboard that brings in all the information we've learned from you so far and starts to kind of be able to give us a platform to play into what the future looks like. And then delighted to welcome Ben, who's going to talk to us about what are those big questions that we'd like us to answer through environmental destinations, through regional water resource planning. And it was very apparent through a lot of the workshops that we had, through talking to yourselves, that there are some key things that are recurring themes of in the future we need to make sure we've got enough water for this or for that, or that we can save water in this way, or these are the ways we use those resources. So Ben's going to launch a new initiative that we've got to talk us through how we are thinking about approaching that and to make sure that your questions are answered as we go forward in water resource planning. We'll then make sure we've got time for questions and answers, and we'll finish the webinar at 1 o'clock. So hopefully most of you are aware of environmental destination and what it's there to do. And so environmental destination is from the Environment Agency that sets out where and by how much water abstraction needs to change to achieve and maintain a healthy water environment both now and in the future. So ours just launched a poll that hopefully you can click on that shares your current understanding of environmental destination. And I think with many of you, with the names that we've got as part of this webinar, we have seen you as part of some of our workshops. We've engaged with you on that area. So hopefully most of you today have got an understanding of environmental destination. So most people have answered that poll. So maybe in a minute, Al, you could launch that one. It looks like most of you have got anywhere between significant, great, some understanding, which is brilliant. And I think we're all on a learning process with environmental destination. But it'd be really interesting just to see whether you've been along to one of our workshops, you may be listening to this webinar last October or one of our meetings through WRE, or whether this is the first time that you've heard about environmental destinations. So if you are able to fill that one in as well. And I think what we have assumed today is the level of understanding of environmental destination, because we assume most of you probably have been involved. So it looks like there are some of you that haven't. So we'll maybe just kind of think about that as we go through. But what we're doing today is building on the guidance, and we can talk that through as we go forward. So for those of you that haven't been on, we have got information on our website and available online, and we can certainly update you up to what we're doing to get to where we are as we go forward. But really, environmental destination is the Environment Agency setting out what a future need might be, both now in 2050 and in 2080, and how much we might need to change our activities, focused on abstraction because it's mainly focused on low flows in the summer, particularly, but to meet that. So all of the work that we've been doing today is looking at the published information that we've had so far, which is available, and we can share some of that as we go through, and look at how we use that information to make a difference in terms of our future opportunities. So for those that this is new to environmental destination, put some questions in the chat if things don't make sense, but brilliant to see many of you have been onto our workshop. So what we're doing today is then playing that back going forwards. So in terms of where we are in terms of environmental destination and an update, so Jo, who is the supply demand strategy manager, working for Anglian Water, but very much here today with her Water Resources East hat on. And Jo leads on a lot of this thinking and this work right across the water company planning, and then on behalf of Water Resources East, taking all of these concepts and ideas and evidence and using it to make decisions in terms of our water resource planning going forwards. And Becky Stanley, who again, Jo and Becky will be familiar faces to many of you from our workshops. Becky is the environmental lead for Anglian Water, again with the remit to take and understand a lot of these areas going forwards, and particularly with environmental destinations. So Jo, Becky and I are going to take you through this first section as we just kind of update you as of the end of March, probably for many of you on the workshops, or as of previous engagement to where we are now. So in terms of what that engagement has looked like to date, we did a number of workshops over the winter, which was preceded by one of these webinars last October. And that really was about raising awareness, raising understanding of environmental destination, what it is, what it means for abstractors, for users, and for organisations on the ground to think through new options and solutions. We've then been taking all of that information, putting it all together, and starting to use that information to play through the modelling, play through the different tools that we have to use that information to update what that future looks like. So Jo and Becky are going to share that with you, and then Katerina is going to go into the details of what that looks like as we go forward. We are very conscious at the moment that the Environment Agency are doing lots on their river basin management planning, and trying to update their river basin management plans. Anglian Water are doing a lot on their drainage and wastewater management plans. There's lots of exciting catchment planning going on. There's all sorts of sector plans being worked up in energy and agriculture. And so we're really conscious that the work that we're doing integrates very strongly with those. And we've shared information where it's publicly available information, and you're happy for us to do that with those ones, to make sure if you tell us something and it's relevant to updating a reason for not achieving good in the river basin management plan, that it goes into there, and vice versa with these others. So we're here on our webinar today. Our plan going forwards is potentially probably to hold some more kind of workshops over the winter where we can bring in the elements that Becky's going to talk to you about, and play that information back to you, start to kind of show where the information that you've shared with us is actually making a difference potentially on some of those abstraction reductions that you'll have seen, which is the default pathway from the Environment Agency later in the year. And then we see that, and we've always talked about this as an iterative positive pathway as we go forward, culminating over the next few years and dovetailing with our regional plan, as Ben will pick up later. So and from that poll initially, thanks Al, it looked like many of you attended one of our workshops that we held from November through to March, which we did some in person, some online, mostly at a catchment scale, and all in partnership with the catchment partnerships and water abstractor groups that were there. And just thank you for everybody that attended those, that took part, and all of your thoughts and ideas that you'll see that we've taken those forward. We had over 475 different people from across all sectors attend all of those, and then we have picked up a couple more in the last couple of months where particular water bodies had got abstraction reductions identified under environmental destination. And so if you look at the map, the green and the yellow bits, I'm now proud to say we've had a form of engagement in all of those areas, and the bits that are in grey are the bits where abstraction reductions haven't been identified under environmental destination. So hopefully most of you will feel like you've had that level of engagement, but certainly there was a few of you that haven't taken part yet, and so we're seeing this as ongoing. And again, if we can help support with one-to-one meetings on this, if you've got a water abstractor group happening and you'd like more information or a presentation to a catchment partnership, do feel free to get in touch, and we're doing those as we go forward. So what did those workshops result in? And delighted to say a huge amount, and those of you that were in those meetings, you'll reflect on the post-it notes and the scribbles on the maps and those kind of different things, and that's translated to over 1,000 pieces of knowledge, as I'm calling it, because it's all knowledge about current projects, about blockers, about potential solutions, about other ideas and different organisations' ways of working that we've been working to translate, and the details. And there's two things we wanted to do, and particularly to achieve through this webinar. One is to start to share that back with you. I think when you can see information, you can start to say, well, actually, we've got all of those things, but how about this? And we can do, or think about those things. And that's what the dashboard that you'll see later is. And really start to then develop these portfolios that you'll remember Joe talked about as we went forward. As part of that sessions, we did do the feedback forms, and again, the information shared on there is always useful. And I just thought I'd share with you the ways that you thought WRE can help with environmental destination going forwards. And a lot of it is that communication, it's bringing different sectors together, identifying funding opportunities, thinking about the kind of needs. And so we're keen to have this session today to play that back to you and to keep sharing that as we go forward, and we'll keep reflecting on that and keep telling us where we can help support in this area as we proceed. So without further ado, I'm going to then hand on to Becky, and Becky's going to talk you through the technical investigations, and then hopefully it'll all come together with Joe and we can share with you how we're putting the different elements together going forward. So over to you, Becky.
Thank you, Teresa, and yeah, good afternoon everyone. So this slide summarises the environmental destination technical investigations work that has been completed so far, along with what is currently underway and what comes next from all of this. So starting with the work completed, and just to note, these projects are just coming to a close, so we're quite hot off the press and we're still in the process of reviewing the outputs and agreeing what comes next. But this work has really been about strengthening our evidence base and supporting the decision making that Joe will talk about later. So first of all, we've had groundwater science working on the source impact library work. So this has been improving our understanding of abstraction impacts on water bodies. And alongside this, we've also been looking at pressures on ecology. So APEM have been working on building 2 hydroecological models for the WRE region. And this will help us understand where water bodies are most at risk and which factors are really driving that risk. As well as that, we've had WSP review monitoring evidence, so looking at where data is strong and, more importantly, where it needs to be improved. So that's helping us give a clear view on kind of uncertainty with that data and where future monitoring should be targeted. And also WSP have been working on the metrics to support our prioritisation, which Jo will also mention later on in her slides. But this has been following the environmental destination guidance that was published earlier this year. And this is really looking at where we should focus effort and resources. So moving on to the ongoing work, so there are three key areas of focus for us at the moment. First of those are the water companies looking at the committed public water supply reductions and making sure that information's ready to go into the SACO tool. So this will make sure that any planned changes are properly reflected in that work. As well as that, we have got aligning water company discharges with growth forecasts, so making sure that we're looking at abstraction and discharges together rather than in isolation. And I think quite a big fundamental part of this work that Katerina, Tom and the team are looking at is running the SACO tool, so the Sustainable Abstraction Calculator and Optimizer tool, not a quick thing to come off the tongue, but that is looking at bringing together all the evidence and giving us a refined understanding of the environmental water needs. So on the right hand side of the slide, you'll see this flow diagram and how this comes together in practice. And as a lot of you have been to the workshops and previous meetings, I'm sure this won't be new to you. But along the top, we have the data and tools from the Environment Agency. So that being the National Framework 2 data and the SACO tool that I just mentioned. And we'll be using the outputs of the technical work to run the SACO tool and get that clear understanding of the gap between where we are now and where we need to be. And as you can see as well in the diagram, there's a strong element of collaboration and stakeholder engagement, which Teresa has just spoken about, and seeing how we can move those forward within that. So all of these outputs will help us with a refined problem characterisation, and this will feed into what Jo's about to talk about with alternative scenarios and pathways. And then finally, in terms of next steps and front of mind, so in terms of engagement, I think the monitoring piece is really key for that. So understanding kind of the citizen science data and where we can join up and make sure that we are collecting the right data in the right places. There's also further hydroecological modelling needed to kind of deepen our understanding and understand how the ecology will respond to different pressures over time. And then finally, continue to work closely with the Environment Agency on the assumptions within groundwater models, just to make sure of consistency and confidence in those outcomes. So yeah, that was everything I was going to cover today. And as I say, they're all quite hot off the press. So as soon as we get we've run through those outputs, we'll be sharing them later on. But yeah, passing over to Jo now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Becky. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, I'm going to just run through a little bit about the guidance that was issued in March this year, and then how we're going to take the outputs from those investigations, the stakeholder workshops, and sort of feed it into the decision making following this approach. So the guidance sets out a 9-step process, which is sort of split into 3 sections. So the first bit about improving this information ahead of planning. So this is really where all the technical investigation comes in and all the information we've received through the stakeholder workshops. Then we go into sort of actually analysing that data, looking at what it means in terms of scenarios. So how much water do we need to leave in the environment, and looking at alternative ways of doing that. And also this is where pathways comes in, and I'll explain a bit about that. And that's looking at alternative ways that we can kind of meet that challenge of leaving more water in the environment. And then the third stage is
basically bringing all together the environmental destination with the other elements that we include in our planning. So this is where we'll bring into the growth forecast for population. We'll also bring in further sort of measures for becoming more drought resilient. And so part of that wider water resource planning work regionally and for the water companies will all kind of fit together with the environmental destination. And that's how we'll develop our sort of best value plans. So with this guidance, it has been really useful in the fact that it's given us a bit more or supports the fact that we need to provide evidence, and that's collective evidence to support this sort of decision making. It's also going to be really useful for us to demonstrate how this sort of high environmental ambition, what it means, and present these investment choices to government so that they can then look at how all of this sort of fits together into sort of wider resource planning. So yes, so the guidance sort of sets everything out into scenarios and pathways. And I'm not sure if it's showing my whole graph here. I'm assuming it has. It looks like it has without, there was some animations here, but it seems to have vanished. But yes, so the graph here shows the difference really between pathways and scenarios. So scenarios are kind of the amount of water, the outcome we need to leave in the environment. And there's two main default scenarios set out. So there's one which is called current, which is aligned to current legislation. And then there's a full scenario. So this is going beyond legislation, incorporating government policy, but also making sure that every water body, that we meet that environmental flow target in all water bodies. So those are the different scales of how much water we want to leave in the environment, and they also incorporate the impacts of climate change. So the other element is pathways, and pathways are all about how we close that gap and when and where we close the gap. So how we close the gap really reflects how much abstraction we need to reduce. It's where we look at which abstractors need to make those reductions, and it also looks at the options and the solutions that are needed alongside those abstraction reductions in order to offset those impacts. The when and where is really like the timing. So this will be where we can factor in the time it takes to adapt, so and deliver alternatives. We can't turn off all these abstractions today and just switch to an alternative, so that it takes time to develop new solutions. And then, as Becky mentioned, we've got the prioritisation. So this will be the work that's come out of the investigation works and also through our stakeholder feedback. So that will really influence which bits we want to kind of, and where we want to tackle first. So we will be able to present alternative pathways, and each of those will be supported by best value metrics and costs, and then the implications that they have on various sectors as well. So when we come to developing alternative scenarios, I've tried to sort of set this out in terms of how the work that the technical investigations are doing and how the feedback we've had through the stakeholder workshops will kind of influence that. So one of the first pieces of work we will do is like making sure we've got the baseline correct. So are all the assumptions in those data sets accurately representing you know, the current status. So this will be where we bring in the water recycling discharges, all those licence reductions that public water supply have already committed to, making sure they're reflected in there. And then through the stakeholder engagement, where we understand that there's licenses that are no longer used and could be revoked, we can also sort of model those to understand, you know, is that enough to actually, you know, make those reductions in that water body. So the other elements we can change is the objective of the water body. So this is very much linked to the Water Framework Directive, RNAGs, the reasons for not achieving good. So we can use our hydroecology modelling. That might tell us that there is a firm connection to flow impacting the ecology, so that might change the sort of status of that water body and how it's sort of used in the scenarios. We've also got the work that Becky outlined, the source impact library, which will help show us which sources are having the sort of impact on those protected features. And then through the stakeholder workshops, you know, a lot of the discussions we had at those were, you know, do the current RNAGs really represent, or, you know, your understanding of your catchment? So we can bring that in here. And in the same line, we can also look at the classification of how sensitive the ecology is to flow within that water body. So this will be where the hydroecology modelling can come in, and also through the stakeholder workshops where we've got feedback that we should really be treating this water body as a chalk stream or a headwater. Then when we come to developing alternative pathways, we've got the options of changing the how and the when. So with the how, we can consider things like the certainty of the problem. You know, is flow really the issue here, or is it another factor like water quality? And that makes sure that we are aligning the correct solution to tackle the correct problem. So again, the hydroecology modelling can help inform that, and also the feedback we got through the workshops. The other thing is like which sectors and which abstractions are actually having the biggest impact. You know, are there like one or two that if those were reduced, does that kind of go, you know, almost all the way to meeting that flow target? Could we sort of tweak the sort of balance of those reductions? So again, the source impact library will feed into that. And then this is really also takes into account how easy it is to adapt for different sectors, and we can take into the types of solution and how long those would take to develop. And also this is where we can factor in the impacts of not adapting. So if abstractions were revoked, you know, or ceased, that could have then the impact on the rural economy, and we can factor that into the how we sort of structure the solutions here. And then we've got the certainty of the type of problem. So if there's like a lot of uncertainty, there's no clear cut whether it's flow, water quality, we can also then use that to sort of trigger that we think that there's more model investigation, etc., more data needed to sort of help firm that up. And the when, so this is very much about if we're again uncertain about the type of problem, you know, that would mean that potentially we don't want to be jumping in and fixing that straight away. We need time to get that more investigation, more monitoring, more data. And there's also the factor of, you know, these areas that we said that will be changing in the future. So we've got future discharges will be changing, and also these reductions that the public water supply will be making. Is the actual problem a short-term issue, a near-term issue? Will it actually resolve once those licence reductions are made in the future? So we can take that into consideration. And as Becky said, we've got the prioritisation metrics, so that will really help us tackle which areas we want to address first. It will also link through from the workshops where we talked about areas that people wanted to protect, enhance or create. You know, that might be a particular water body that we, or a particular sort of feature within that water body that we think that's important to make those abstraction reductions there first. And then the last one for me is just to say about unintended consequences. So obviously with reducing abstraction, groundwater, particularly groundwater abstraction, this potentially creates a risk of flooding. And so we've got work looking at infiltration and groundwater flooding, and we've also got feedback through those stakeholder workshops, how we can take that into account. So those are all the factors that really sort of will influence how quickly and where we would tackle the environmental destination. So I think I'm handing back over to you, Teresa. Is that right?
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, that's brilliant, and hopefully that's kind of helpful. There's so much information to take in and different elements that make up the environmental destination bits, but that links so nicely to what Katerina's going to portray. And I think for those of you that came to the workshops and saw those different colour maps of how much abstraction might be reduced in going forwards, all of what Joe's just talked about is the different pieces of the puzzle that feed into those calculations. And we have an opportunity, as you've seen what Joe said, what Becky said through the guidance, to update those. You've given us lots of information so far, and Katerina's now going to kind of play that back to you as to what we've done with that information so far and what we're planning to bring that all together and use it. So over to you, Katerina. And Katerina is our data analyst at WRE, and so works across the teams, supporting the information we have, and is a whiz on data portrayal and data information. So over to you, Katerina, to talk us through this section.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm going to talk to you about the environmental destination dashboard that we've been developing. So the dashboard has been designed to support informed decision making for environmental destination. So the aim is that it brings together the evidence from technical investigations alongside any insights gathered through the stakeholder engagement. So the dashboard is at an operational catchment level. So, and at the top of the dashboard, you can actually select the operational catchment you're interested in, which I'll kind of show you a bit later. So we're aiming for the official release soon. As Becky said, it's kind of hot off the press, so we're still waiting for data permissions to be finalised. And it will also be continually updated as we receive more information as well. So the first tab in the dashboard is sort of the catchment tab, and this looks at a summary of the catchment landscape. So this includes information about the water bodies and chalk streams within the catchment, a breakdown of the broad habitat in the catchment, as well as a breakdown of priority habitat. Also, it looks at sort of open green space, such as amenities like golf courses and parks, as well as public rights of way. And you can also have a look at some of the underlying soil type of the catchment. So the next tab on the dashboard explores sort of the drivers that influence the ED targets. So this is namely the Habitat Directive, so all those SVA, SACs and Ramsar sites, as well as the groundwater dependent terrestrial ecosystem sites. It also presents some of the data from the Water Framework Directive and River Basin Management plans. So this data is actually sourced from the EA Catchment Explorer, but kind of allows you to interact with the data to ascertain the sort of water body status, objectives, and reasons for not achieving good status, which I think most people refer to as the RLAGs. So the other part of the tab is kind of feeding back some of the information from the technical investigations and some of your stakeholder feedback. So this is all the stuff that's sort of challenging those data assumptions in those data sets. So this includes some of the macroinvertebrate sampling site locations that we've been using for the hydroecological assessments. It's also looking at where we've identified and prioritized monitoring gaps for flow, water quality, and macroinvertebrates, and also some of your feedback that you've let us know about some of the monitoring gaps in that area. So the next tab is the flow tab. So this sort of examines the components that contribute to the water balance within the rivers and the flows required to sustain a healthy river environment. So this sort of shows you a schematic view of the river network, which shows the water bodies as a grid with points for where artificial influences such as abstractions and discharges impact on the network. We've also got something that shows you the flow compliance with the environmental flow indicator. So this is an EA data set that shows whether the river flow are currently above or compliant with the threshold for a healthy river environment. This section, we're also aiming to include some of the work done in the technical investigations to find out what proportion of the river is so non-compliant. It also displays the abstraction sensitivity bands. So this again is an EA data set that assigns a value or a category for how sensitive a river is to abstraction, which in turn informs the FE target. So these sort of baselines, ASBs, can be increased to give increased protection to water body based on local evidence. So for example, Joe mentioned some of the scenarios. So in some scenarios, the ASB and chalk water bodies can be increased to 3 to give it a higher flow target. Finally, it shows some of the data about the unintended consequences, such as groundwater flood risk. So this section includes analysis undertaken in our technical investigations to look at how vulnerable population is to groundwater flood risk. And it also includes some of your feedback that you've shared about where areas are vulnerable to flooding. So the next tab sort of explores the potential scenarios for the future river environment and its requirements. So there's sort of two things to consider. So it's the climate change scenarios. So this section looks at Met Office climate projections and EFLAG assessments, which the Environment Agency has used to estimate potential changes to base flows and future climates. So this is kind of an important consideration, as a river that is currently compliant may become non-compliant in the future if the change in base flow is quite significant. So actually for the National Framework 2 data that they published, the two climate scenarios they have considered is one representing a drier future climate and one representing a wetter future climate. Another part of the scenario that needs to be considered are the legislative requirements. So this outlines which water bodies are kind of excluded or included into a scenario. So as Joe mentioned, there's the current, which is the current regulatory requirements, and then the full, which is the kind of full governmental ambitions and protections, and then sort of we have intermediate and alternate scenarios which would sit in between the two. So the next tab is the solutions tab. So this explores some options to achieve a healthy water environment whilst meeting the water demand. So in this section, you can view the possible abstraction reductions that are required for a water body to be compliant with the FE and the different scenarios. So currently in there is the National Framework 2 reductions that they released, but these will be kind of updated with SACO outputs as we kind of improve the baseline data. It also looks at some of the nature-based solutions and opportunities to benefit the environment. So this kind of brings in some of the water resources use MBS opportunity mapping and some of the MBS projects that are taking place in the region, and some of the stuff that you've let us know that's going on. And then it also incorporates other potential and existing solutions that you've identified. So I've got a few of you in the stakeholder feedback. Let us know about some rainwater harvesting projects and possible reservoirs, etc. So that's all shown there. And then the next tab looks at the kind of pathways, which sort of Joe mentioned, and some of the work we've been doing with the ED investigations that looked at where action should be prioritized first. So this is kind of all based on the ED guidance and informs the planning for creating different pathways to achieve the targeted outcome. So as Joe mentioned, we also got some of your feedback here for where you felt that we should protect, enhance and create the water bodies. And then finally, we're still leaving a kind of feedback section that will allow you to kind of add any more information that you've got to us. So for example, if you've got some more evidence that an RNAG is incorrect, or you've got a new solution you'd like to put forward, then there's an opportunity to do that here. And then finally, I've got a sort of demonstration video, which hopefully will work, kind of just to show you how the dashboard works. So if I just play that there. So as I mentioned, it's operational catchment, so you've got the opportunity to select the catchment that you're interested in. So it may take a few minutes or seconds, sorry, to kind of pan to your area, so you just have to be patient with it. So you can then navigate to sort of the sub-tab. So as I mentioned in all those sort of slides, the different sections, and then you can sort of interact with the data, turning off layers and turning on, looking at the legends, and also looking at some of the charts that have statistics of some of the breakdowns of the habitats and priority habitats. You can also then look at some of the larger headings. So for example, the drivers tab I've got here. So again, you can click and interact with the data, and it should filter based on different your selected types. So I'll hand over to Ben.
Thank you, Katerina. Yeah, it's an amazing talk through a huge amount of work. Yeah, like you say, we're really excited to share this back to you as soon as we can, Katerina, and then you can all kind of delve in. But hopefully, to say, it gives you that transparent opportunity to have a look at all of the different parts that feed into environmental destination that Joe and Becky and Katerina have shared, and then you can work with us to look at what those future scenarios look like. So yeah, thank you, Katerina, and if you've got any questions, then yeah, please pop them in the chat and we'll do. But before we get to the questions, yeah, handing over now to Ben, who's Technical Director at Water Resources East, that's going to take us through how you can get involved in some of these big questions for water resource planning, that's based on a lot of the feedback from the conversations we've had with you all over the last few months, and a way of just keeping us asking the right questions, giving you the right answers as we can carry on doing this. So over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Teresa. Yeah, as Teresa said, this is kind of a bit of a sidestep that might seem initially a step away from environmental destination, but into the wider world of regional water resource planning. But bringing it to this session is really important because, well, not only are there a lot of you here and there's a big interest in ED. ED is, the single largest factor in our regional planning and water supply challenges that we're facing over the coming decades. Leaving more water in the environment and protecting water dependent features is going to expose trade-offs with other things that span out into growth. Can we supply the sectors that need water? What are the real impacts going to be on the environment? How do we maintain food security alongside protecting the environment? So it's really going to have a strong bearing on how we promote investment into catchment solutions and investment into other grey infrastructure around the region. So bringing it here is a nice kind of stop and check moment to see if we're asking ourselves the right questions. So just to kind of set the context for this, obviously in developing our regional plan, we do pose ourselves big questions. And the overarching one is, how do you meet deficit in supply? How do you meet the projected demand, both now and the projected demand in the future? And our 2023 plan, December 2023, really set out to resolve those projected deficits in public water supply, really, because that was kind of where the data sat and where our structures allowed us to work in much more detail. We explore ways of delivering, meeting the public water supply demand balance in ways that deliver co-benefits for other sectors and the environment, and it focused on improving the region's drought and climate resilience. But our next plan obviously is going to need to do that, but actually reflecting on this before this call, a lot has changed since 2023. A surprising amount has changed. We're working under a new Environment Agency National Framework for Water Resources. There's new policy context, new water resource planning guidelines. DED guidance has just come out that Joe and Becky have worked through a little bit in summary here. Growth ambitions have changed around the region. Local plans are being developed. There's a new 25-year farming roadmap just emerged. There's a stronger drive to work across water quality and water resources. And there's really just a broader expectation on us all, and as a regional group and the other 4 regional groups, to work collectively to create a more robust evidence base upon which decisions are going to be made. And those decisions are maybe like policy decisions, decisions on growth and plans, or regulatory actions like license changes. So all the stuff that Joe kind of talked about and Becky, and how our evidence base is going to stack up to kind of shape our scenarios and pathways, is all really bundled in with this. Well, why are we asking ourselves these questions? What is it we're actually trying to evidence better, essentially? So it's an important time to do that. So we're kind of launching this idea of a big questions. So by inviting you and our members and our other stakeholders to pose their big questions in light of those changes and challenges I've just talked through, we're hoping really to better understand expectations of us as a regional group and use that to frame a reflection back to you, our ability to answer those questions. And in some cases, we may not be the ones or be able to answer those questions. But what we can do is start to be able to see the big questions you're posing yourselves or ourselves as a society, and what we can do in that space now under our current funding and program and governance arrangements, maybe in the future in the next planning round, setting ourselves kind of a longer course of a longer trajectory towards better integrated planning. And importantly, the reason we're bringing this now is to set ourselves up sooner rather than later, so that as Joe and others work through our decision-making process, we're answering the right questions and kind of building it up from the right building blocks. So just to give a bit more feel for what I'm describing here, we pose ourselves questions already through regional planning, and as we work through the generation of scenarios and different pathways in the last planning round, and we've already started to do, we do actually tag ourselves back to a why. Often this isn't just a computer simulator going off and exploring millions of unknown unrelatable scenarios. This is about real questions. So for example, what additional schemes would we need if a key option or a key strategic resource option is delayed? How quickly could we reduce public water supply abstraction while still maintaining supply? What other schemes might be needed if the higher growth scenarios emerge? So that we do ask ourselves these big questions, and we work through different scenarios and pathways and model them and explore what the implications are for scheme selection and the environmental outcomes. But what this exercise, opening it up to you as a wider group and beyond, is that it will help us ensure we're focusing on the things that matter. And I want WRE to be in a position to be able to, independently answer those big questions. So there's some examples on the next slide, but just a quick note on what this isn't. This is not the beginning of an FAQ document. So this is not an opportunity to ask us, how do you do something? This is reframe the question to how would we answer the question? What is the question? And then we can then explore with you how we can go about doing that in the right way that means that the outcomes are relatable to our membership. Remember that WRE is not a water company. It's not a group of farmers. It's not an ENGO. We are kind of well placed to expose trade-offs and explore the choices that we're making as a country around policy decisions and regulatory action. So I want to really use this as an opportunity to hear from you. What are those trade-offs you want us to explore? What are those kind of little questions that you think we should be asking ourselves or be able to answer as a region? So some examples of questions here. They might span everything from strategic to local. So I mean, it's called big questions, but we're equally open to little questions or local interest questions. So everything from, how can we ensure that all the available water is being used in the right way? Are we exploring all the solutions with high amounts of discharged water through IDB systems? Have we got enough water for new data centers, depending on how they're constructed? But all the way down to kind of local things, and this kind of touches on some of the stuff that Becky and Joe talked about before around pathway development, that now we're looking more to integrate catchment level thinking into our regional planning decision-making process. We really want to understand the stuff that you care about at a catchment level. And we started to do that through the catchment workshops, but there's still time to come to us and say, you know what, I know something about what happens in my catchment. What would happen if we went down this other route in your scenario development for this catchment? What would it mean if I can tell you a little bit more about how water is being used? Could you answer the question that, what would a different investment profile look like in my catchment, and what would the implications be for a particular sector or for an environmental outcome? So really, this is kind of setting the scene for what you at various scales, both strategically and tactically, might want to explore. So there is already a page live on our main website. It's going to be edited and updated as we proceed through the process. And this is not an exercise that's going to have a 2-week window and you've lost your opportunity. This is going to be open throughout the planning process because things change. Things changed in the last 3 years. Things will change before we publish our plan in 2029. So keep thinking about these big questions, because what we don't want to do is come to the position in 2029 or whenever we actually kind of link up all our plans for publication and realize we didn't answer the big outstanding elephants in the room, basically. But Teresa has asked me to encourage you, having listened to my blurb here, to if you're immediately thinking of ideas, click on the link on this slide, go into the Microsoft form at the bottom of the page and submit a question. It doesn't have to be super well thought out right now. And there will be an exercise, let's hope we get many questions, Teresa, but there will need to be an exercise where we distill those questions into themes, categories, a sort of broader representation of what our stakeholders are interested in answering. So when we publish our plan in 2029, don't expect literally every one of thousands of questions to be answered as if it's an FAQ or a consultation response. We'll probably thematically summarize that into something and signpost where we have been able to answer a question and what evidence we've used, signpost others who were better placed to answer that question or already answering that question from the right place, backed up by the right funding and governance. But yeah, really, for me, this is a really good opportunity to take that moment to go, right, what am I hearing about? What's the scale of the problem? What are the things that I care about within my work, functional interest, and pose those to us as a regional group that has genuinely an ambition to be truly multi-sector and have an ambition to be thinking more widely than just solving a supply deficit in following the guidelines. So really open to hear some interesting questions from you. Thanks, Teresa.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben, very much. And yeah, hopefully that kind of takes a whole lot of different work and different themes that builds on what we've been talking about before together. And like I say, it's the start, isn't it, Ben, of how that is. But it just means that we've got like you say, Ben, the formal guidance, the formal ways of working, the ways of working already, but we're really conscious that this space is evolving and that you get an opportunity to feed in as we go forward. So Rupert, your question in the chat will add in straight away. I can do that for you and to do as we go forward. So we've now got some time for some questions. And there's some questions that have come in. I know, Katerina, you've started answering them, which is brilliant. So Peter, your question right at the beginning, where does that water from IDBs that's pumped out to sea come into our thinking? It very much is part of our thinking. Actually, you'll have seen, as Ben, it is one of our big questions that we are really conscious of, that we think about water in its entirety. We think about flooding, we think about water resources, we think about all of those different elements together. So it is there are some specific projects going on with different people about the IDB water particularly. And so, yeah, it is very much part of our thinking and how we merge it all together. Also, how we make the most of that water that's in a particular area, you know, and where that, you know, how that can link to support the region as well. So yes, that one's in there. It's also a registered question, so I'm pleased that you asked that one. Graham, the dashboards are created using open data. Katerina, you've just answered that one in the chat, haven't you? Do you want to say anything more to that one now?
Yeah, so it's all, the majority is based on open data or stuff that's derived from open data, and where it isn't, we've kind of been working to get permissions that we can share it at a certain scale. So.
Which links, Luke, to your question about when you're going to be able to access a dashboard. We wanted to have everything ready to share with you today, but as Katerina said, we want to make the dashboard the most useful it can be, and some of that is this derived data that we just need to make sure we've got the right permissions to share with everybody. So hopefully, Katerina, it will be, you know, in the next few weeks over the summer, but what we will do is we'll email you all the second it goes live with those links and those details and for you to have a look and apply at. So we'll do it as soon as we possibly can, just to get those data things in place. And Phil, based on your question, yes, very much the dashboard is going to be open to everybody, and that's how we've designed it, that everybody can use it. And it's great that you're already thinking you can use it in other areas, and I think it's one of our aspirations then, Katerina, Joe and Becky, isn't it, that it's a place that lots of people can understand some of the future, what the future scenarios look like in terms of water resources, and can start to kind of play that thinking in an interactive, informative way. So yes, very much open to everybody, and great that you're already starting to think about how you can use it. Adrian has got a question, everybody, about envisaging a tipping point scenario that resets the baselines within the forecasting period. I don't know, Joe, Ben, whether you might like to answer that question.
This is the baselining tipping point. Yeah. I mean, it's a great bit. Let's just kind of rack it up. My short answer is that's a great key, quite big question, right? But there are things, I think, there are big changes in the making, in the development, that are going to be announced in the next couple of years around strategic existing abstractions for both water companies and other sectors. So that kind of, once those have been decided, that almost like reset the baseline in some of those catchments. There's also other work that's going on to explore what how the demand management strategies that are already underway and likely to kind of proceed over the next few years might actually impact wastewater treatment discharges, and therefore what recycled water is being placed in our catchments, and that might help us understand what the new baseline will be by, say, the mid-2030s. So we are exploring those things, but that's a great example of the question.
Thanks, Ben. That's brilliant. We'll pop that one in now as well. Alistair's asked a question. Well, the dashboard looks terrific, which I can agree with, Katerina. Have we got natural capital data that's been incorporated, or are there plans to for like the ESME data sets that are available, Katerina?
Yes, we don't have it included at the moment, but as I said at the beginning, we're kind of open to adding additional data to the dashboard, so it could be something we'd look into to adding.
we're very conscious of like LNRS, Katerina, aren't we? And all of these kind of things that they're all going on as well. So we can definitely add it in. Many of you will have looked at our catchment analysis platform that we had ready for the workshops as well. And we see these work in tandem. That's got all of the data sets. And then this is the particular data sets relevant to environmental destination that we're looking at. So yeah, any suggestions like that, Alistair, are brilliant. And we can look at how we incorporate that. Luke's got a question about smart abstraction license conditions that I might take, and how those reductions from sources are only required where necessary. That absolutely is one of our key options and solutions, Luke, and we've got a number of points. So that is included in the solutions that we've looked at, and that will be on Katerina's dashboard that you can see. And separately, WRE are actively looking at how we can do smart abstraction and dynamic licensing. We've got the Smart Agri Abstraction trial that's yielding really interesting results where we are live at the moment doing smart abstraction and working very closely with the Environment Agency on that trial. So yes, very much so, and they're kind of key to some of those solutions and those pathways that we'll be looking to take through the modelling as we go forward. Ian, definitely with the LROs, Katerina's actually put the local resource option screening studies layer into some of the solutions and pathways, and we know with some of those things coming out, they are resulting in future solutions. So that an element of that is included, Katerina. I think there's more we can do with the outcomes of the LROs, and we're looking at that then wider as how we can support sectors to take some of the solutions that comes from the screening study forward. Vice versa, and it might be your question as well, Ian, things that we've identified, could we put forward that this group take on an LRO to make a difference, to look at those solutions? So I'm hoping it will work both ways round on that one, Ian. And then there's a few others in this chat. So I think, Rupert, your first question, I say will pop into the big questions there. Stephen, primal question to ask: to what extent is the degree of past environmental management already done sustainably in the long term? And I think that's a really critical question. I know there's certain people that really want us to look at that and look at the efficiency of these savings, look at those kind of things. And Becky, a lot of work's been going on to look at some of that past changes, past environmental management, things that are happening right now. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Becky, particularly. We are building that in.
Yes, it's something that's being considered in the hydroecological modelling, looking at land use change in the past rather than how we, because that is a very difficult one to to look at in the future and understand how it will change.
And there's calls, I don't know if Rob is on this call, but there's calls to make sure that any changes that we make, have an environmental effect going forwards, as well as there's brilliant people on the call I know that are doing a lot of that work, and river restoration and things. So yeah, we want to make sure it's all linked in together. But yeah, it's really important. Terry's got a question, Joe and Katerina, about sustainable energy, kind of floating solar, to make the difference both to ED and to other outcomes. Again, we've got some of those in as solutions already, Terry, but yeah, definitely making those links to other sectors is really important. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that.
Well, Teresa, I mean, that's a good, really excellent question. This is a good example of one that we will go away and kind of actually think about and scratch our heads and say, well, what is it within the remit of WRE's plan and framework and operation to do in that space? I think absolutely signposted there are potentially sustainable energy solutions for the water supply network, but there are teams at the water companies who are exploring sustainably producing energy and using energy for the network. So that's a good one where we might signpost, and we might choose as an organization to express a desire for that to be happening more. But will it actually be in our technical modeling work? That's one we'll go away and scratch our heads on. So another good example.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Terry. Dennis, you've got a question about land use change and the use of trees along riverbanks and things. These are all kind of things, and we can make sure, like probably is already in the kind of questions, but we can make sure that's included. And actually, Katerina and Becky and Joe, through the use of the SACO tool, we can look at you know, all sorts of options and how they affect flow, and start to kind of put some numbers towards it. So you know, there are wider benefits of many of these things, and I know riverside planting for shade is really important, but we can start to kind of actually model with the tools now that have been provided us from the Environment Agency to look at the difference that these make. So Dennis, you know, we can certainly pop that in. Thank you for the detail, and we can start to look at some of these, but I think, you know, the whole remit is to look at all of these things in the round as integrated water management and how we can benefit ecology, morphology, water quality, water resources together, and to keep that in an integrated fashion. And Rupert, your land use change, very much dynamics are changing, aren't they? Definitely. And the base year and local plans and things is going to change. And I think, Joe, that's a really important part of the alternative pathways and scenarios that you're putting in, and keeping that going forward. So we have got baselines we're working on, but our role is to keep updating that, to keep planning for those alternatives. I don't know, Joe, if you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to just say that is the area where particularly the water recycling discharges changing over time, that is us reflecting that growth. So when we talk about a baseline, it's like a profile over time. It's a changing baseline over time. We're not just looking at 1 year. That will change over the next 25, 50 years. So yeah, that is all factored into our assessment.
And equally, we're encouraging all sectors to put forward what their future demands might be, what their future opportunities are, aren't we, Ben, as well? So we're working really closely with agriculture, for example, to share with us what their future demand might be. So that's built in as well. Brilliant. Right. Thank you, everybody. We're just going to next steps now. So like I say, we'll keep sharing this with you. We'll share the dashboard when it's live. Becky, the technical investigations, if we were to do an October webinar, I think we could, you know, share back some of that information with you when we get to that stage, and really get into the details of these portfolios. So all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you to our presenters for your time this morning. We have recorded the session, and the slides and recording will be available. For those of you that might want to claim your BASIS and OROSO points, if you haven't already, pop those into the chat. And just to say, yeah, thank you for joining, and we will update you and keep working with you next time. Thank you, everybody.